In this webinar today, you will learn about disability in New Brunswick and Ability New Brunswick's work, how extreme events uniquely impact the physical and mental health of persons with a disability, and how to properly and meaningfully engage persons with a disability in adaptation planning. As we dive into this presentation and discussion, a reminder, climate change and its impacts can affect our mental health and overall wellness. We have compiled a non-comprehensive list of eco-anxiety resources that we will link here in the chat if you would like to further explore the list. Now, without further ado, I'm super happy and grateful to welcome Hailey Flaro, who is the Executive Director of Ability New Brunswick. Hailey Flaro has more than 25 years of management and administration experience in the nonprofit and community-based sectors. Hailey is a leader in health and disability public policy development. She has been making her mark in communities throughout New Brunswick as Ability New Brunswick's Executive Director since 2006. She leads Ability New Brunswick and its mandate to promote public policy development and service excellence for persons living with a mobility disability. Hailey is a community builder, a published author, a passionate researcher for social policy and community-based research initiatives, as well as a dedicated advocate for persons living with a mobility disability, youth, seniors, and persons living in poverty. Hailey has a strong interest in building capacity for communities to assist vulnerable populations during extreme weather events and will share lessons learned from her work and offer insights into effective safeguards and policies. Without further ado, I will pass it on to you, Hailey. Welcome.
Thank you so much for inviting me and to be here today. It's a real honor. Thank you to our interpreters and our translators as well. It always makes me feel at home to know that as many people as possible can participate. I'm going to work really hard to talk slower than I usually do because the passion comes out often. So interpreters just give me a big wink if I need to slow down. So what, if someone had told me 15 years ago that I'd be giving this presentation, I probably wouldn't have believed it, even though I've worked with vulnerable populations for about 30 years. And I should always disclose my bias. I was born and raised by a mom that had a mobility disability, a progressive neurological condition. I was also raised by my dad, but it changed the way I looked at the world, the way our family navigated the community, the things that our family had to think about and plan for. I lived a life of great privilege. My father was an engineer. He was a chemical engineer, and we were well supported as a family, but it didn't mean we didn't experience roadblocks and barriers to living in the community. And even years ago, climate change was and extreme weather events were something that we often had to think about. Oh, there we go. There was just a bit of a delay. There we go. So the history of Ability New Brunswick, what gives us the expertise to come in and talk about this topic. We've been around for 70 years in New Brunswick and are celebrating our 70th anniversary this year. We were founded by veterans over 70 years ago that were injured in World War II, who got together in a Toronto hospital and said, we're not spending the rest of our lives in hospital. They established the Canadian Paraplegic Association nationally. Our chapter formed in New Brunswick in 1956. We incorporated in 1990 and we rebranded to Ability New Brunswick, a much more positive, inclusive name, in 2011. But these roots are really important to us because those veterans changed the view of disability. They shifted the script. They had the medical professionals now seeing and focusing on rehabilitation and the establishment of rehabilitation units in all of our provinces. It saw recognized the abilities and potential of people with mobility disabilities, and it also led to better pensions for veterans with paralysis. So our history is an important part of 70 years of lived experience. Not only do we do research, do we do engagement with our population and consult with them, but we have 70 years of being working alongside people with lived experience to hear from their experiences to help inform our programs, our services, and most important, public policy development. So our mission, all of you are used to mission statements, but we're really about the empowerment and full community participation of persons throughout New Brunswick who have a mobility disability. And you can see how something like extreme weather events, and I'm going to talk more about that, has a significant impact on our population. So, we work to be a voice for that population in community, in public policy. We work to be a leader in service delivery at all levels and influence public policy at all levels. I'm going to talk later about, the climate change work underway in New Brunswick and what input we had into that, and being key partners in the rehabilitation, disability, and research fields. So why this lens is so important on things like extreme weather or any policy or any service or any emergency planning in New Brunswick is that our provinces in the Atlantic Canada love to look at other provinces to learn from their models, when in fact, it's hard for New Brunswick to do that because our disability rate is much higher than any other province. Only Nova Scotia is ahead of us in that, and it's not something anyone wants to win. We have the second highest rate of disability in Canada in New Brunswick, next only to Nova Scotia at 35%. That doesn't include those living in long-term care homes or First Nation communities because they're not captured by the Stats Canada data. We know mobility is one of the most prevalent disability types in New Brunswick. It's about 94,000 New Brunswickers over the age of 15. And we have the oldest populations in Canada, in Atlantic Canada. About 46% of New Brunswickers over 65 have a disability, and one of the most common disability types is mobility. I've added here some income information too, because adapting to things like extreme weather events are costly for people. I know the own expenses I've incurred during some significant weather events in New Brunswick, like Arthur, damage to property, being without power for a few days, having to rely on other sources of, meal prep, food, losing freezer items, all of those things. So one of the things, it's not that every person with a disability lives in poverty, but it's very costly to have a disability. If someone gets diagnosed with something tomorrow and is not able to work, their income changes, the cost of disability, even with social programs and good insurance, is high. So you can see here that 46% of our service participants who access our services earn less, than 15,000 annually, and another 18 learn less than 24,000 a year. So it's an important lens to place in planning for emergency preparedness. The other thing is that 44% of our service participants say they can't meet their basic monthly household financial needs. So you can imagine the financial stress that is placed when there's an extreme weather event that takes some different resources. So what's a mobility disability? I just want to give you a picture of who we're talking about. Any condition that affects the ability to move, ranging from lack of coordination to complete paralysis. Someone could be born with it, like cerebral palsy. We've just had a new referral of a 1-year-old with cerebral palsy that's learning to walk using a little rollator. And someone might acquire it later in life, like the diagnosis of multiple sclerosis or ALS, or incur an injury from a spinal cord injury, or have an amputation secondary to diabetes. So again, the populations we work with, I need to change this because it's now 1 to 106, the age brackets of the people we work with. Disability doesn't have any age limits. And the most common conditions that people present with are listed there. So spinal cord injury, muscular dystrophy, cerebral palsy, spina bifida, ALS, stroke, arthritis, and others. So roadblocks, an organization like ours exists because I'll just let our interpreters get set up. Organizations like ours exist because there are roadblocks. I talk to people every day who say, well, we've made so many advances in human rights, inclusion, community accessibility, technology. Why is an organization like yours needed? But it doesn't mean that people are experiencing a good health or quality of life. Many people with a mobility disability face barriers because of poverty, lack of access to mental health services, lack of access to physical activities, poor employment prospects, lack of accessible transportation and housing, and inaccessible communities really compound the problems impacting health and community participation. Entrepreneurs never get this when I say this, but I would love to turn the lights off here and our 35 team members from throughout the province. We'll find new jobs because they're so talented. I'd love for us not to be needed, but unfortunately, with our high disability rates and the high number of roadblocks people face individually, systems wise, community wise, we're going to be open a little longer. So this is a list of our services, and I want to focus more on the climate change, the extreme weather event piece. But these are some of the services that our organization offers, and we have a website, abilitynb.ca, where you can learn more about them. I would be remiss if I didn't just mention them because every time I do a presentation, I get a little reach out from someone that says, my mother, my brother, my child may be dealing with a mobility disability and might benefit from your services. Just going to, before I pivot here into talking about extreme weather and what we see and experience, just to illustrate kind of the work we do. Our organization as a consultative partner in emergency planning, extreme weather event planning is so critical because our model is a real kitchen table model. We're out at the table with people like Marg, working on her barriers, access to transportation, access to housing. When Mark retired, she had a mobility condition that hadn't quite progressed, so she was always quite independent. But life changed. All of a sudden, she was being prescribed a really expensive wheelchair that she couldn't afford. She had some private insurance, but the copayment was too high for her. She wanted to be able to get out in the community, and driving was no longer something that was safely recommended for her. So, how did she get around? She was given an assessment, and someone with a 1 hour assessment wanted to place her in a new nursing home when she has all the skills, abilities, and ability to direct her own care. So we were able to sit with Marg at her kitchen table and develop a plan to address the funding issue to get her the right wheelchair, the transportation issue so she could get out in the community, some housing modifications, and access to home support services. Meet Ava. Ava is a young person we work with that uses a power wheelchair for mobility. Ava came to us because, like all of us, she wanted to find a summer job and start building that resume to work towards her career goals. So Ava has successfully worked at the Ross Bay Community Center, Vocational Center for the last few summers, building that resume. We helped to remove some roadblocks and get subsidies for the employer to hire more students so Ava could have a successful placement. I mention Ava because her wheelchair can be up to 600 pounds. Imagine in an extreme weather event or evacuation how difficult that would be when Ava relies so heavily on this device for her movement and mobility. And Claire, we do a lot around inclusive work. Claire used to have to stay behind in the classroom when her peers went out snowshoeing or on field trips or to the apple orchard because she didn't have the right equipment to be able to go with them. And now with this $12,000 Hippocamp is what it's called. It's an all-terrain wheelchair from our Adapted Sport and Recreation Equipment Program. It's also a great transfer device for people in rough terrain, etc. Claire has never missed a field trip. We put the skis on so she goes snowshoeing. We put the all-terrain wheels on so she can go to Fun Beach Park and beach wheels so to go to the beach. Swimming is very important. So extreme weather and its impact. Let's get into why you asked me to come today. We know that people with a disability face significant higher risks of mortality, injury, negative health impacts during extreme weather events. Not just from a textbook, we've experienced it. And we often see the root reasons are inadequate emergency planning, lack of accessible infrastructure, and underlying vulnerabilities. I'll never forget during Arthur when we had a service participant to help reduce pressure sores, which aren't just a pimple, they're a pretty significant health and safety concern for a person that has paralysis in the lower limbs. Overnight, the power went out, and they had a pressure relief mattress that relied on power, and they couldn't afford a backup source. The way that the power went out while he was sleeping and didn't notice, he wound up not being able to move positions independently in the bed. There was no one there to help him. His cell phone fell on the floor, and he wound up there for several days and passed away. And, this was someone that, there just wasn't backup planning, didn't have the resources to be able to plan to make sure he had an alternate source, hadn't even thought about having a check-in system, wasn't with someone, wasn't registered as a MB Power priority code customer. So we often help people register for that. So they're people that rely on electricity for mobility, respiratory equipment, pressure relief mattresses, that there's a check-in system. Hadn't registered with the local fire department. We encourage everyone to do that so they're aware. So there was just a whole series of planning that could have better helped him. Extreme heat, floods, and storms disproportionately affect this population. Ability New Brunswick is constantly during extreme heat trying to get people air conditioners and air conditioning devices. People often can't afford to buy them or sustain them over the summer due to high weather, high energy costs. But those that live with certain type of conditions, I'm on a blood pressure medication that hates the heat and extreme heat in the summer. I have to be so careful because it makes me dizzy and it can be really unsafe for me. Many medications, mental health medications, medications to treat various conditions are significantly impacted by heat. So keeping people cool is really critical to their health and safety. You see those warnings that come out about, medications and extreme heat and getting to cool spots. Some of the challenges is there sometimes are various, cooling stations in communities, but if you can't afford or there's no accessible van in your rural community, or if they're not accessible, that presents other barriers to people. So, we service disruptions, increased isolation, and limited evacuation resources are a significant barrier for the population we work with, and we see it frequently. It's not a formal program. I would love for every emergency measures to have this type of initiative is a kind of a air conditioning bank that can be used during extreme heat for people to be able to access that. It could be shuffled between regions in a province because not all regions often experience the same extreme weather events. We do that here with our service participants. Don't tell anyone. It's not a formal program, but we've seen so many crises that we can't help but be thinking of that all the time during extreme weather. Yeah. So extreme heat, people are really susceptible to high heat-related issues, got a little ahead of myself. Things like spinal cord injury might inhibit people being able to sweat, which changes temperature control. So overheating can be more critical from someone that's not living with a condition. Many medications are impacted by heat. Infrastructure failure, power outages from storms, heat waves can shut down ventilators, dialysis machines, pressure relief mattresses, power wheelchairs. We see that too often. If people can't get to charging stations because they're not accessible or there's no accessible transportation, that further compounds that. Devices such as solar chargers, etc., often aren't effective on really high powered devices like power wheelchairs, and often, cost prohibitive to people. So those are some of the things that we try to work individually with people on problem solving, and it's not always possible to find a good solution. Evacuation and safety, lack of accessible transportation, lack of accessible emergency shelters. Emergency shelters in New Brunswick, there's two that are wheelchair accessible. And so it's not even a last resort safeguard for many people. Specialized care during disasters makes evacuation really difficult. I'll never forget, and just advanced warning is this might activate some people, just like I should have mentioned before I mentioned about the loss of one of our service participants. But the Moncton shooting that occurred, all of a sudden we had all of these home support workers that people relied on for 24-hour care, for going to the bathroom, moving positions, that couldn't get to people. It was a crisis for us for many reasons, but on that level, because we had people isolated, not able to move positions, not able to eat, and there was so many heroic stories. We all probably have seen that Mr. Dress Up. It's one of my favorite graphics about look for the helpers. There's so many stories of home support workers that risk their own lives to go into the isolated area just so they could get to their clients who needed their help. It's really difficult in those type of emergencies to be able to identify who needs help and when. And we were heavily relying on those people calling us to say, my workers didn't show up, like this is what I'm experiencing, and trying to develop plans to get them support in the home or get them evacuated. Communication gaps, emergency warnings often fail to reach people with a sensory or cognitive disability. I want to commend this group for having ASL interpreters today. Do you know how hard it was to fight to get government in New Brunswick to have them during the COVID lockdown? Access to communication is a right, not a privilege. And it was a hard fought effort when it should be standard. Any major announcements, any major emergencies, we should be able to have access to, interpretation for people, so everyone can learn the information, and hear the information they need. Social and economic factors, people with a disability often face higher poverty, like I talked about. So, I can go out with my husband and get a generator. I can have access to on-demand transportation. I have my own vehicle. I'm very, very privileged, and I can buy solar chargers and do all the things. I can afford air, cooling systems in my home, but it's not always possible for everyone to do that. So there always needs to be a poverty lens on emergency planning, because it really reduces people's ability to adapt or relocate. I can remember a guy we work with that used independently a power wheelchair for mobility, and him getting transferred to a canoe during the floods that were taking place down, is it upriver or downriver? Downriver in New Brunswick in the Majorville area, and he didn't have access to his primary mobility device for weeks, and had to be he was a larger man, had to be transferred into manual wheelchairs, wasn't able to be independent. It's there's a lot of dignity issues there, but there's a lot of practicality about how do we safely evacuate people that rely on these type of devices. I do want to applaud New Brunswick. You gotta brag about the province that you live in, right? New Brunswick's first ever climate change risk assessment. I've been talking a lot over the years and working with health, and we certainly work closely with emergency planners, fire departments, NB Power, all of those safeguards that help us with emergency planning with our service participants. But I was so happy when, I was approached to say, we really need a disability lens on our climate change risk assessment. And the report was just recently released. And if you go and take a look at it, it's amazing to see that we finally have an equity lens applied, to a report and a document. It's really encouraging that this is going to be a central part of planning, because we know many people with a disability face structural barriers, related to with climate change that are often thought of last instead of first. And that's not an equity lens. If you've ever found yourself saying, well, we'll consult with people with a disability later, when you look at our rates in Atlantic Canada of disability rates, it should be one of the first things and integrated from the onset. Otherwise, we're going to see the devastating stories that we often experience. Many people face barriers in receiving emergency alerts and accessing emergency services. My team tells me weekly now that with inflationary costs, and we're all feeling it, regardless if we're employed or not, or have a disability or not, that the low-hanging fruits on budgets are winding up being things like telephones and internet and cell phones. And it just guts me. Seniors that are giving up their cell phones, and then they have to give up their lifeline because there's no way for lifeline to contact to contact the person. It's a really scary financial environment when you have people that are having to seeing those as low hanging fruit on their budgets, and it's going to impact people's ability to receive emergency alerts. Ability MB's team works from Grand Manan to Miscou Island and left and right in between, and 50% of those we work with live in rural communities, which is I really applaud our team for that, because it means we're meeting the population where they are. But it still amazes me the lack of cellular access in regions, and how, the old-fashioned pigeon, what we call it with some of the communities we work with, about neighbors passing on information to neighbors, is still critical. I went up to a cabin on the Tetagouche River a couple weeks ago, and for 30 minutes there was actually absolutely no cell phone cell phone service. And driving into the camp that we were going to, and thankfully the camp had internet, so we would at least be able to get our devices activated. It made me quite nervous, even though my husband and I were both healthy. So it's something we have to think about. And what does communication look like in areas that are underserved? My staff do a great job of noting on a map where all the outage areas are. And I just mean the standard low access to internet, because they need their cell phones to maintain safety traveling around this province. People with a disability are really often underrepresented in, I'll just repeat that, our interpreter's back. People with a disability are often underrepresented in adaptation planning and decision making. And really, what I wanted to talk about today is just shifting the script on how you're doing emergency planning and community planning and thinking about extreme weather. And there are disability organizations everywhere, many like ours that have been around for 70 years. In New Brunswick, we have a New Brunswick Disability Executives Network of over 10 provincial disability groups that government departments come to consult with us all the time. There's built-in mechanisms, so it's not always starting a new committee. It could be adding someone to your team, doing consultations while you're working on policies and infrastructure, sending an email to say we want to think about this roadblock, or what should we be thinking about in planning for for the extreme heat that's coming this summer? What can you offer? I'm always surprised at how many emergency measures officials don't understand how much emergency measures work that Ability MB is doing during extreme weather events. We're a partner that are just so busy focusing on solutions that they don't realize all the great work that's happening behind the scenes to work on the health and safety of people with a disability. So sometimes strategies don't reflect the live experiences for vulnerabilities, especially things like accessible evacuations, accessible transportation. Those are often left out. I really have to applaud services like the MB Power and New Brunswick Priority Code customers, because all of these shuttle vans have been going out and doing checks on people that are registered during power outages to make sure they're okay. People are also registered with the fire department. We've seen volunteer fire departments send people out to do, just a wellness kind of check-in for people that they know are vulnerable. There's been so many great practical ways to do that. And more planning is including the acquisition of evacuation wheelchairs, of, looking at air conditioning banks and different things that we can try and share and help people that are going through these issues, because we do see at Ability New Brunswick a huge increase in people needing medical intervention during extreme weather events, often due to poor infrastructure, not having the right heating, cooling systems, etc. Just a couple of quotes from the climate change. So strengthening risk assessment in New Brunswick, strengthening equity across all levels of planning will be important for ensuring an inclusive response to climate change. I know a natural reaction in public policy is often, let's start a committee. And I've been around 30 years now, and it doesn't have to be that complicated with the terms of reference and adding in official partners. It could be that consultation in the policy development and the infrastructure planning. It could be including groups and communication trees and communications, because we can often get things out to the kitchen table faster than emergency measures group that's relying solely on internet or television. Climate impacts are deepening existing inequities, and they really are, especially for people with disabilities. We can't wait to see what Manitoba and Saskatchewan or Kingston, Ontario does, because that's what New Brunswick likes to do, because our disability rates are much higher, and the potential crisis in health and well-being, mortality is even higher for us. So safeguards and strategies, inclusive planning. We really must integrate disability-specific needs into emergency planning, management plans. Look at your community and see what would work for you. Would it be regular touchstones, involvement in a committee, consulting with a group when you have a plan developed and drafted to get input? Engage with disability organizations as a rule and not as an alternate, we'll get to that or after. Look at targeted assistance. You must provide resources like we really must look in the community at providing resources like backup power, accessible charging stations, accessible air conditioned areas for those that can't get out, accessible on-demand transportation. There's some communities in New Brunswick that don't have accessible cabs. For about 4 months last year, people couldn't even get from our airport into the city of Fredericton because there wasn't a working accessible cab. So that's a really scary thing on a Tuesday and during an emergency. So asking yourself, for what accessible transportation resources will our municipality, if we're in one, be able to charter out for us to use these in emergency planning? Like, what does that look like? And long-term support, we must address the long-term impacts on mental health and access to medical care after events. Things like the COVID shutdowns, extreme heat, storms like Arthur and others that have happened through the Maritimes are devastating emotionally, financially, which can impact our mental health, etc. So how are we communicating what sports are sports? supports are available to people in the community to be able to debrief what's going on. And, some of our systems, like our power corporations or emergency measures, aren't there to provide a therapeutic support. They're to help manage through the emergency. But at the same time, we need to recognize that people are going, imagine you use a power chair, you live in the family home, you have a great support network in your local community. Your accessible van is now underwater and you have to be evacuated, and you have all of these medical needs that are taken care of at your home. What's that going to look like? So what Ability New Brunswick is famous for, there's no fee or income test for our services. We're getting more and more into emergency planning with people with a disability to ensure their health and safety. We're very focused on holistic planning. We can often get to the kitchen table better than anyone else can that's working with vulnerable populations. We have a really kitchen table service. Public policy is really important to us, and that's why we're speaking out more on the stories and experiences we're having um, with people with a disability, because all of us need to know and be aware of it. And the reason I bored you with data is to show that there's a business case for it. We can't be ignoring disability with the high number of people with a disability in Atlantic Canada, especially. So I always have this is not appeal for donations, but we are a provincial nonprofit, and I like to share that. Our work is about helping people. So if you're ever doing, dress down days or all of those different types of things, about 30% of our budget relies on donations from the community to help people. So my director of development would never be happy if we didn't always have this slide in a presentation. It's a good chance to remind people that we're not a government agency. We're a nonprofit founded by veterans and celebrating our 70th year this year. And join our team. We are really privileged with a large social media following. I know not everyone loves social media, but a large and positive following where we share resources, tips. We use that as one of our many communication strategies during extreme weather events. So if you have things you need to get out there, our platforms, social platforms, have really high analytics of people with disabilities, families, service providers. So follow us on the various socials to keep up to date on what we're doing in New Brunswick, and for you to use as a platform to say, hey, can you share this? Department of Health reaches out to me during every upcoming extreme weather event to make sure that we're sharing the tips, the sheets, who to call. It's so critical. And I was thinking of a presentation I have later this afternoon because I thought I had some interactive questions to ask you, but no, this session you're going to ask me some questions. So I just wanted to thank you for having me in today. I could have told a lot more stories. I told a few harsh ones, but they're the reality of what our team is seeing and dealing with. And I just want to really talk about the opportunity to bring organizations, even if you're not in New Brunswick, into your planning, your community planning, because that lens, the poverty lens, which impacts a lot of people with disability, is so important. I talk every day about how I live a life of great privilege because I have a roof over my head, because I can afford a cell phone, because I have a generator. I'm very privileged. It's not a norm. It's not the standard. And I'm not in a position this week where I'm having to say, Brad, my husband, we need to save some costs. We're going to have to cut our internet, or we should go down to one cell phone and share it when we can, meeting someone could be at risk at times when they're on the road. We live in a life, many of us, of great privilege, and it's bringing the organizations that can shed light onto the other lenses. Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much, Hailey, for your amazing presentation. You're such a wonderful speaker. I think that you did such an amazing job really talking about the lived experiences of what it's like to have a disability and really connecting it to climate change adaptation. So we'll move on to the Q&A session. And so on the bottom of your Zoom screen, you should have a Q&A box that you can select. If you don't see it, you can select more as well, and then Q&A. So I see some questions coming in. The first question here is, how does the province of New Brunswick plan to work with private companies to strengthen these safeguards and strategies? More broadly, what level of ambition is the province aiming for in building more resilient communities? And have you already identified promising solutions or priority actions? So there's three parts.
Wonderful question. And I did disclose that we are a provincial nonprofit. People often think we're government and we're not, but I can give some insight from my perspective of working with government. All of you you're from different provinces, and I do have to say that we went in New Brunswick. I have to work with whatever government, so it doesn't matter if I have a preference for one. I'm actually fiscally conservative and very social policy liberalist, right? So, but at the end of the day, New Brunswick went through a period of very low engagement or consultation on anything, and now with a change in government, we're actually getting over consulted. Don't tell the government I said that. So much that I'm writing briefs and all every week, and so it's exciting that there's a want to engage on things like extreme weather and climate change, and there is dedication to making communities more resilient, and reteaching communities how to do meaningful engagement doesn't always mean a committee. It can mean consulting better using existing mechanisms. And promising solutions or priority actions, I think it's challenging communities to think about how you engage. I talk to so many municipalities that will say to me, I had a conversation last week and they're like, I've been in this role for 10 years and I never thought to consult with a disability group. I really love that vulnerability, and it helped us shift to how we're going to work together. We don't need to meet once a month. They're going to share with me a community planning draft they have on emergency preparedness and to put our lens on it. Promising practices. We're a small province in New Brunswick, and I don't always agree with the way, community structures are structured. Right now our organization is struggling. We have community health developers with Horizon Health. We have regional resiliency committees, and we have included community inclusion networks. And in many regions, none of them are talking, and they're all working on different initiatives. I think we need to get smarter about how we do good community resiliency planning, how we bring partners together, how it's not just about talking about the same issues, but advancing things. So that's my huge undergrad from University of Guelph bias in community development. I think we need to start spending smarter, which actually will result in better collaboration.
Thank you, Hailey. Our second question, I'll just wait. Our second question is from Helen. Helen asks, in addition to essential services you provide to people, can you highlight the opportunities you've had to bring joy together with the work?
Highlight the opportunities to bring joy together with the work. Every day people often look at me and say, you've been in there 20 years. Like, are you just comfortable? Oh, I'm uncomfortable every day, with the work we do, but it's the joy that we see every day in this work and the success stories, neighbors. We did a big initiative for having just calling out people to check on your neighbors during a major storm. And we had so much feedback from people that they don't even go and check on their neighbors. And they did. And they found they needed medication picked up or food picked up. Or that's the joy that I get seeing us bringing back community, like the community I was raised in. My mom made food for every event, and at the church they knew everyone that was isolated. And I think we're bringing back some of that in New Brunswick. Like, get to know your neighbors, get to support them. My husband snow blows the driveway for the single mom with 3 children that can't afford a snowblower. Like, though, and it's not him being a handout. It's lifting her up, and she loves to make them banana muffins and feels good about that. We have to get back to looking at our assets in the community, because government funding is not always what the solution is. It's bringing people together, and there is so much joy, Helen. I can't even tell you. I would highly recommend. Our team has a Microsoft team chat that's just called Success Stories. Whether we passed a budget, got a funding sources, helped Jenny afford her housing or get a new ramp, or developed a safety plan so she can live at home longer. That's the stuff that really there is so much joy. There's dark stories and we need to learn from them, but there's so much joy.
Thank you, Haley. Our next question is from James. James says, I really appreciate the stories that people with disabilities face from climate impacts. Could you share some more stories specific to flooding?
Yeah, so what we experience often with flooding is the need for relocation, large number of medical devices. People might have CPAP machines, respiratory machines, ventilators, power wheelchairs, assistive eating devices, and I'm talking fast because it can be a whole load of costly stuff, and trying to get those evacuated is really difficult. And it's judgmental for us to be like, well, people should be moving into urban centers because taking people out of the supports of their neighborhood who often help them with many things is really difficult. So, flooding does and relocation presents challenges. It's sometimes even finding accessible hotels in a region for Red Cross to be able to put people up is a major challenge. So those are some of the things I think I would really just want to, I know there's a bunch of questions, highlight is that we need to be thinking about how do we ensure that important assistive devices are brought with people, and or that there's agencies that can loan things in the community. We keep a bunch of bath benches here that we sanitize just if people are traveling from other regions and forget their bath bench, because we've seen the trend and we know that's an issue. So looking for accessible spaces for accommodation, charging centers, cooling centers, and making sure accessible transportation and hotels are available.
Thank you. Helen asks, do you have an analog in Nova Scotia or other Atlantic provinces?
Spinal cord injury, Nova Scotia doesn't work, I don't think, with all people with mobility. We're the spinal cord injury organization in New Brunswick, but we work with all groups. But they do have, connections and expertise with people with a spinal cord injury, and would be a partner. We often partner on peer programs and national work. So that would be kind of one of our sister organizations. Equally, PEI would be spinal cord injury PEI, and spinal cord injury Newfoundland and Labrador.
Thank you. Next question is from Frank. Frank asks, are EM alerts continuing on radio? All but cost-free and not internet dependent.
Yeah, bring it back old school. Like my husband and I have been actually Sunday nights listening to a radio show. But it's so funny. We listen to it on our Google. People don't have radios as much anymore. And so we actually last summer, with a pending storm, gave out and went out and bought 7 radios for people because we know that even though radio stations are downsizing, they do less live stuff on weekends. They don't have people to give live updates. It's all taped. It's all they do still for paid advertising can do alerts, etc. So we're kicking it old school by still giving out radios. My husband and I have one of those LO being crank radios that's been helpful for us. But the challenge with communications is radio is becoming less and less on demand. There's less news, unless there's some paid pre-advertising. Sometimes it's not the most reliable.
Thank you. Our next one is from Scott. Scott says, there is this language of vulnerable populations that doesn't tell the whole story. Could you talk about how the social programs and style of government we have renders population vulnerable?
Absolutely. I don't even love the language vulnerable populations, but it's that government buzzword. That's something really always concerning to me. And when we group it, if there's a strategy that just says we're going to help vulnerable populations, unless there's some teeth in what populations, because the needs of those that are deaf and hard of hearing are very different than sometimes than people with a mobility disability. So I think there's a lot of education still needed about just putting vulnerable persons in a box because they all have different needs. They often have different needs, different approaches, different strategies. The social programs and style of government. Yeah, my big thing, I think that's a great, great question, Scott. One of my biggest peeves, and I've been in nonprofit 30 years, I don't hold back much anymore. The filter's gone. I just say, has really been equity deserving populations as an afterthought, and that people in ivory towers just are often are not getting to know the real issues that boots on the ground organizations. And I would say even 20 years ago, we had really good data and information, but because we've pivoted to really be talking engaging our population, we're learning more. And governments are still focused on a systems approach versus a population approach. I'm right now penning a response to New Brunswick's physical activity strategy, which thinks they got away with including people with a disability because they mentioned accessibility once and they mentioned inclusion twice, but there's no strategies about what that would look like. And that is actually against the UN Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities. It actually contravenes our Accessible New Brunswick Act, which says nothing about us without us. So there's a lot of education needed about how to engage, vulnerable populations, equity deserving populations, a diversity of populations. It's a really good question.
Totally. Thank you so much. Next one is from Caitlin. Caitlin says, Hailey, you mentioned Ability NB has some resources they share. Are there any checklists for municipalities looking to update their plans and emergency measures and better integrate a disability and poverty lens into their work?
I would really love Ability New Brunswick to develop one, and I think I'm hoping, it's a tight budget here as everyone is feeling it, and we've been faced by some limitations in our budgeting. It was on a wish list to develop our own New Brunswick checklist, but I don't know if it'll get kicked down the road this year. But there is some, I just don't can't pull up my bookmarks right now, but there is a couple of national resources that we were part of the development. They're a little older, but they still have some really good information that I can share. If you look at emergency planning, people with a disability Canada, there are some different fact sheets out there that we actually give to people. It'd be a great resource for municipalities for us to develop that. People with a disability are telling us they want checklists too. I'm shocked no one reads the provincial budget anymore at bedtime like I did last night. People want short, concise information, videos, things with subtitles, YouTube reels, all of those type of things. But municipalities, I know you like a good checklist, so it's in our wish, and I'll share some of the ones that we refer people to.
Thank you. And we would love to share that in our email to our attendees as well. Our next and final question, given our time, the report in New Brunswick shared with us highlights the importance of ongoing updates, monitoring, and repeated assessments. What concrete mechanisms does New Brunswick intend to use to track progress, evaluate whether adaptation measures are working, and adjust course over time?
Oh, and the person's anonymous, so it makes me think like they're at the government in New Brunswick and they'll want to see what I say. Again, I don't work for a government department. I work closely with government, but that's our question now too. The report was recently released. There's a commitment to looking at how that's operationalized and metrics being tracked. I sound like a government official now, but that is an important question, and we're going to be asking ourselves. It was just released, so they've just started the roadshow of webinars on it, etc. And I guarantee those questions are coming up. We plan to issue a response for it too. But I have so much trust in our government on this because it was the first time it's been done in New Brunswick, and they were like boots in, highly committed, and reached out to disability organizations right away, which hasn't always happened in climate change and extreme weather.
Thank you so much. There were so many different questions, and thank you, Hailey, for
I
answering all
know.
those questions.